We're in the dog days of camp. There's a lot of guys going down. And our audience deserves, Doc, an explanation around what's happening. Our audience deserves to hear from a professional like you, 17 years in the National Football League, dealing with all the drama and the trauma for years. They deserve to hear from you on what's happening with Jalen Ramsey, what's happening with Tua. So we're trying not to be like them, but we're still a little bit from them, Ashley, right? Like we, a little credibility.
Just a tad.
Little tad. All right.
Well, hey, Dr. Chao, I kind of want to start there. He had mentioned some names, and let me give you a disclaimer first. So I'm a huge Dolphins fan, so hopefully you'll have nothing but good things to say here. But Jalen Ramsey, we really want to figure out, what's the latest with him. We know I think it was July 28th, he had a meniscus tear. And, on social media, we've seen videos of him walking around with his brace, but the latest was we saw him walking on the field, with no brace. So can you speak about what maybe the timetable might look like for a guy like Jalen Ramsey, considering the progress that we're seeing so far, and just really what he's dealing with that meniscus tear?
Absolutely. And let me just start off by saying what I deal in is insider knowledge from being in the NFL for 17 years, not insider information, right? The SEC will put you in jail for inside information. As a doctor, HIPAA violations. This is not inside information. This is not my calling the Dolphins doctors or athletic training staff who I know and then relaying this. This is analysis from afar based on insider knowledge of the game and meniscus tears. And the problem here is that the good news is he had a meniscus repair, which means it was sewn. But then the bad news with that, that means that it's a bigger tear and it needed to be sewn, and now you need healing time. And let me tell you, this is a very hard thing to return to play from. Look, everyone talks about Adrian Peterson and getting 2,000 yards 9 months after his ACL, and he's superhuman. But in 2016, he tore his meniscus week 2 of the season, had it repaired, made it back week 15 for 6 carries, 22 yards, and did not play week 16, 17 that year. And that's the guy we all say has the quickest knee recoveries ever.
Wow.
This is hard. This is hard for a DB to return to play from. I unfortunately don't make a lot out of seeing him walk without a brace. First of all, if you go by the book, and I've seen the Twitter stuff where people said, oh, it's great news, he's walking. If you go by the textbook and you go by the boards and the standard conservative answer that's taught in medical schools and residencies, yes, it's still non-weight bearing crutches and a brace. But if you talk to any seasoned pro sports team doctor, that is advanced to weight bearing as tolerated in certain range of motions. So that doesn't necessarily speed up the timeline. I think it's a tall order for Jalen Ramsey to come back and be Jalen Ramsey.
Wow.
I'm quite sure he'll come back. But look, no offense to Brandon here. It's easier to return as a wide receiver than it is a DB because you're dictating your routes.
Right.
A DB has to react to the routes.
That's right.
It makes it much hard. It's still hard for a wide receiver to come back from, let's say, an ACL, but much harder for a DB to do so, right? Because of what they have to do. So I'm not overly optimistic, unfortunately, on Jalen Ramsey.
So Doc, you said something interesting there, and it's a shocker to me, right? Because, we've seen a lot of guys go in and get scopes, and they're back in in 10 days, 2 weeks, right? So obviously, when you go under the ninth, it's a different process. And so you hear Jalen Ramsey, he went to his coach McDaniel, and he's like, yo, what's the timetable? So I know how to beat it, right? Like, so for you to come out and say and break it down the way you did and describe, using Adrian Peterson as the case study is really a big deal, right? Because we are all expecting Jalen Ramsey to come back in end of November, December, or potentially even beat that, right? Because we see a lot of athletes, say, come back before they should. They say 8 weeks, 12 weeks, I'm back in 7. We've seen this time and time again. So for you to come out and say that you're not confident, it seemed like you're not confident that he'll be there come December.
Yeah, and it's not a knock on Jalen Ramsey at all. It's just what the injury is. You cannot compare him to Kadarius Toney, who apparently have a meniscus trim and may be there for week 1 for the Chiefs. It's no comparison. It's the difference between when you trim your meniscus, it's like mowing the lawn. You can go play football on the grass immediately. when you do a meniscus repair, it's laying down new sod or growing new grass. You have to keep off the grass. And as great, look, no one respects professional athletes more than I do, because I've seen it. I've seen all hard work, and people have no idea how hard it is to recover and return. I mean, all the time on video, for example, Breece Hall, oh, look, he's running. He hit 23 miles an hour. He's doing great. No, he's not. He's still limping. But what about, yeah, he hits high end speed, but what about deceleration and cutting? I have so much respect for professional athletes, but here's the one thing I have to say. Very difficult to speed up biology. And that's what we're talking about here. It's one thing to cut down on rehab time after you're cleared to do certain activities. And as a professional athlete, they do that all the time. But there are some medical time limits for biology, and it's minimum 3 months for meniscus healing. And then even if you pass that hurdle, now you got to get back into what you do. It's just a high bar is all. I'm not trying to doubt Rams.
Well, Doc, I have a question for you. You mentioned biology, and it's interesting because I feel like every single football season, we are seeing more and more injuries, and we're seeing them in younger and healthier guys. And some injuries are not that severe, and some are major injuries keeping them out for months. And you would think as science and advancements in nutrition and workout routines continue to develop, that we would start seeing less of these major, just season-costing injuries. But that seems almost to be the opposite effect. Why is that?
Well, a couple of different theories, right? You have to take each injury individually in terms of what it is. But the first thing I would say is football is not a contact sport. Football is a collision sport. Basketball is a contact sport. Football is a collision sport. But then, of course, in the preseason, it's well known that 50% of teams lose a significant player or a starter before week 1 of the season. And you say, well, gee, why is that? Well, let's just talk about the dreaded A's, right? The ACL tear or the Achilles. And there's been a couple of those already this season. Not to mention the acclimation injuries of hamstring, groin, and this, that, the other. But the dreaded A's, ACL and Achilles, that we all know need surgery and ends your season. Here's the problem. As people and players are bigger, faster, stronger, your Achilles tendon and your ACL isn't any bigger or stronger. The average athlete's ACL and Achilles is not much different than mine, yet they're much bigger, faster, stronger than me. Imagine driving a more powerful car on the same suspension. And that's part of the problem of some of these injuries. It's just the way how good athletes are today. They've stressed their bodies to the limit.